Everyone's come yet. I've updated the relationship between the objection, which was a separate thing, the uncanny, and death. So I've triangulated the relationship of parts. And I've just added today this quote this line from Helen Sassoon in a book called Abstracts. The world is time's wound. I don't quite, it's sort of an abject statement. It's a kind of infinity. It's hard to grasp. I thought I'd start off with that. Sharon, you can start reading. These are the words of the PowerPoint today.
Transgression, limit, sacrifice, boundary, taboo, dissolution, violence, drives, eroticism, excess, melancholia, fragility, horror. In his late period, Titian increasingly found his inspiration in Ovid's Metamorphoses. The subject matter of these paintings are invariably transgressive in their depiction of sacrificial violence, erotic encounters, and death scenes.
So there's paintings in the Wallace collection in London. It's one of his late paintings inspired by Ovid and the idea of a sort of poetic mode of pagan poetic sort of mode of depiction, which were all invariably done for the King of Spain, King Philip of Spain. Quite a number of us have seen this painting together. It's a big painting, very damaged. This is Titian's playing of Marsyas from the 1570s. It was in his studio at his death. Could anyone describe what's in the painting, what the depiction is?
Well, it looks like they have the mythical creature hung up by his hooves or his feet from the tree, and they're slicing into him.
So there's a musical contest between Apollo and Marsyas, and Apollo wins because of his access to the power of the gods. So it's an unequal contest. But they each can extract a prize from the other, and the prize that Marsyas plays is being skinned alive. And there's the blood and the water which runs off his body creates a fresh spring of water. The figure of Apollo is a double figure. He's a figure that this is interpretation, he's a figure that cuts. So he's got a relationship with cruelty as well as sublime music. So Apollo plays the instrument, but also cuts. And the figure of King Midas, who's meditating on the scene or looking at the scene, is a double of, it's got a close resemblance to a late portrait of Titian himself. So it probably is placing himself as King Midas and himself as Titian. And he's, what's the duality between, in Greek aesthetics, you've got Apollonian and what? Dionysian. So what Apollo is the values of what? What's the opposition? Which is an opposition which goes into Renaissance painting. What's the opposition between the Apollonian and the Dionysian? It's basically between line and colour. So Apollonian is line, like in the work of Michelangelo, let's say, for instance, and whereas colour is Venetian mainly, and it's embodied by Titian. So in a way, it's got a paradox at the heart of it. The figure is conquered is Dionysian, and Titian is Dionysian. but it's to do with the redemption of art itself. So out of violence and tragedy and pain and suffering and death comes a redemptive renewal, a kind of that art is a fresh spring which comes out of experience, sometimes bitter experience. This is a late painting which Titian was painting for his whole burial in the local cathedral, but it was finished by his students. But it's a strange painting in that the figure of, they're looking at the figure of Christ, but something is disturbing, something's coming into the space. So there's a sort of mystery. This is Caravaggio from 1610, I think. 1609 to 10. Sharon.
Caravaggio painted Salome receives the head of St. John the Baptist in 1609 to 10. King Herod offered Salome anything she requested, and above all else, it was the head of John the Baptist she wanted. In 1610, Caravaggio also painted David with the head of Goliath. This was the last painting of Fabritius, as he was killed in a gunpowder explosion. He was a student of Rembrandt, but he had not consolidated his reputation, and he was lost to art history until he was discovered again in the mid-19th century. Sometimes accidents can transform the relationship to a work of art, allow a way of seeing to emerge that opens the capacity to see something as other. The bird is beautiful, and yet it is not able to symbolize free beauty because it is chained, so a division within perception occurs.
This is the last painting. He did 12 paintings in his life. And he was discovered again in the mid-19th century as a sort of proto-impressionist artist or proto-modernist. There's a book by Donna Tartt called The Goldfinch, which is based on this painting. This is Jericho. It probably guillotined heads. And the guillotine replaced the process of torture death, replacing the death of the instant. It was an equal death and thus introduced a democratic principle to the penalty. So the aristocracy and the peasantry each had an equal death. And this was kind of unconsciously a relationship to the democratic principle of the new republic. Which had made war in Spain.
Goya produced a horrifying series of prints called The Disasters of War in 1814. This print, Heroic Feet Against the Dead, represents mutilated bodies of victims of the French occupation of Spain. It is one of the most abject depictions of war ever presented in pictorial form.
This is a slave ship by Turner.
Turner's painting The Slave Ship in 1840 coincided with two important international anti-slavery conventions held in London. The power of the painting is derived in part through the subject matter only becoming self-evident after a closer examination. This fold of sublimity and horror lead to a deeper feeling of disgust than might have been the case with a more didactic painting.
This is read on. Sense of the night, and I mean, it predates Freud's discovery of the unconscious and dream interpretation by a good many years.
It is a silent image, if there is such, since it is at the same time an image of silence. the silence of the skull, as well as the silence upon which, with lassitude and melancholy, the mouth of the young man encloses itself. Jean Nancy.
Someone else read. Kate.
Let us guard against saying death is the opposite of life. The living creature is simply a kind of dead creature, and a very rare kind. Nietzsche, 1882. Mayarm's second child, Anatole, born July 1871, became seriously ill when he was 7 years old. He suffered from rheumatic fever complicated by an enlarged heart and died October 1879, aged 8. Mallarmé left a series of fragments for a 4-part poetic memorial, a tomb. He was emotionally and artistically unable to forge a finished work from them. 3. Since the day when death installed itself, marked by malady, no longer himself already, but the one we would wish to see again later, beyond death. Summing up death and corruption, appearing so with his sickness and pallor.
He wrote well over 100 fragments, but he couldn't find a way of burying his son in words. He couldn't find a way of building a tomb out of language. So he was unpublished in his lifetime. It was a failure. It's one of the great modernist inaugurations of the fragment.
Freud explains the sense of uncanniness around perfect doubles, as with twins or two unconnected people who look exactly alike, by tracing the double back to primitive beliefs about copies as ensuring the continued existence of the thing that they are copying, as Egyptians made images of the dead. Freud surmises that the concept of the soul was the first double. Now that this belief has been overcome, seeing doubles feels uncanny. Thus, Heimlich is a word the meaning of which develops toward an ambivalence until it finally coincides with its opposite, unheimlich. Unheimlich is in some way or other a subspecies of Heimlich, Freud. Freud's The Uncanny is an essay that investigates the realm of darkness, saying the uncanny would always, as it were, be something one does not know one's way about in. Yet it is not the pure realm of darkness that is the concern, but rather what is revealed or brought to light. Paul de Man defined the uncanny as to make the invisible visible. Darkness is uncanny because it is the site of ghostly emissions. Freud also evokes the fear of blindness and the fear of being buried alive, both of which are other forms of loss that might be figured as being connected to the night. Derrida evoked the idea of the relationship of the night and the idea of difficult writing or research, which by not submitting to the norms of culture, quote, is excluded from the scene, occulted, deprived of the light of day, unquote.
Do you want to stay with this a bit longer?
It has so many different parts of it. Shall I read it again?
Yeah, read it again.
Okay. Freud's, oops.
Oh, sorry. I had my finger on the button.
On the go button. Okay. Freud's The Uncanny is an essay that investigates the realm of darkness, saying, the uncanny would always, as it were, be something one does not know one's way about in. Yet it is not the pure realm of darkness that is the concern, but rather what is revealed or brought to light. Paul de Man defined the uncanny as to make the invisible visible. Darkness is uncanny because it is the site of ghostly emissions. Freud also evokes the fear of blindness and the fear of being buried alive, both of which are other forms of loss that might be figured as being connected to the night. Derrida evoked the idea of the relationship of the night and the idea of difficult writing or research, which by not submitting to the norms of culture, quote, is excluded from the scene, occulted, deprived of the light of day, unquote. Heidegger on being uncanny. For Heidegger, there is no core to the self, no determining id, but an openness and possibility, which is the basis of the uncanny, because there is nothing else in place of that to determine us. Eroticism is the brink of the abyss. I'm leaning out over deranged horror. At this point, my eyes roll back in my head. The abyss is the foundation of the possible. We're brought to the edge of the same abyss by uncontrolled laughter or ecstasy. From this comes a questioning of everything possible. This is the stage of rupture, of letting go of things, of looking forward to death. George Bataille.
I mean, in many ways, the Surrealist movement was split between the ideologues of Andre Breton and George Bataille. George Bataille was a sort of more minor figure in the Surrealist movement, but in a sense was much more inclined towards abjection, whereas Breton was towards the marvelous. Indeed, the first stage of Surrealism could be seen as a celebration of the marvelous, whereas the later, darkest phase of Surrealism can be seen as abject.
George Bataille was a philosopher of excess. Following from Freud, he developed the way in which the drive of eros was connected by the death drive, with eroticism being a condition of both drives being linked. He wrote that my obsessive need to make love opens on a death like a window on a courtyard.
And the phrase orgasm as a little death was, I don't know if it originated with Bataille, but it was certainly popularized by Bataille.
In chapter 8, The Open Eyes of the Dead Woman, Bataille writes, I stretched out in the grass, my skull on a large flat rock, and my eyes staring straight up at the Milky Way. That strange breach of astral sperm and heavenly urine across the cranial vault formed by the ring of constellations, that open crack at the summit of the sky, apparently made of ammoniacal vapors shining in the immensity, in empty space, where they burst forth absurdly like a rooster's crow in total silence. A broken egg, a broken eye, or my own dazzled skull weighing down the rock, bouncing symmetrical images back to infinity.
It's an interesting structure of writing. What does he do in this writing? What's the structure or the loss of structure?
Well, it starts out located, and then it fragments that sense of location into everywhere.
So it becomes formless.
Yeah.
He's a philosopher of formlessness. And it sets up a chain. So a rooster's crow, broken egg, broken eye, dazzled skull. Symmetrical images back to infinity. Anything else? Has anyone read the Story of the Eye? He originally published under a pseudonym.
Should we carry on?
Yeah, last one.
Georges Bataille, commenting on Antonin Artaud after his return from Rodez, said that, quote, he looked like one of the oldest men I had ever seen, unquote. Imagine witnessing the figure of Artaud after his delicate brain had been turned ashen with convulsive electric charges. Images flickering intermittently, passing through, breaking the composure of logic. A strange mixture of excess and emptiness in the form of eyeballs scattered onto the exterior of this. Now transformed into ashen face with electrical storms circulating in the flickers of eyeballs, in which the warping of logic and broken images are arranged and rearranged again until they assume the reality of dust. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, but with electrical charges running through. Did you write that, Jonathan?
Yeah.
That's gorgeous.
I thought I wrote it in conjunction with the Bataille writing. But he had electric shock treatment and he was tortured by it. So he was completely saturated with electrical storms when he was released.
And those note
Enlighten us, so why was he treated that way?
What's that?
Why was he treated that way?
Well, he was said to be mad, deranged. But he was excessive, he was extreme. I mean, he probably was partially insane, but the treatment was insane and cruel.
Can we see any kind of progression with his sketchbooks and his drawings? Because you've told us before.
He did hundreds of sketchbooks, hundreds of drawings. When he went to Rodez, which is a insane asylum, he started to draw and paint like crazy. So as if he was on speed. And I mean, he was probably bipolar, but they didn't have a term for it. So electrical shocks kind of polarized his relationship between destruction and creation in him.
Can we see degradation in the images or progression of the image changing?
Well, they close to time disintegrating. The diagrams and the drawings and the writing all start to merge together. He developed the term subjectile for his drawings, where he would put a cigarette burn into the page or let the pen go through the paper. So he physically assaulted the paper.
I was thinking, your writing here, it's absolutely fascinating how it makes you feel that he is like an empty chasm as you're listening to the words. It's absolutely fascinating, and how you kind of get a sense of the hollowness of everything. Absolutely, I love that. Brilliant piece of writing.
Let someone else read.
I'm happy to read.
Good.
Metamorphosis tells the story of a salesman, Gregor Samsa, who wakes one morning to find that he had been transformed into a huge insect, published in 1915. That's Franz Kafka.
Does anyone know what Kafka's professional job was?
Something like
was,
insurance
some
sales?
kind
or
of-
something?
Insurance.
Yeah, bureaucracy. Yeah.
And he used to go around assessing in, let's say, a mine. He would assess the mine for danger, and he took photographs to back up his judgment of how much it should be insured by. So he used photography as a detection device. I mean, apparently he was very good at it. So in a way, his short stories were often nighttime writing. It's part of what's called, which the magazine Kell determined as being extreme literature. Joyce, Kafka, Artaud, Jean Genet, Mallarmé.
T.S. Eliot, The Wasteland, and other poems. A crowd flowed over London Bridge, so many, I had not thought, death had undone so many.
Again, this idea of the living dead. I mean, three of the greatest, or several of the greatest artifacts, Picasso's Les Damoiselles, Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, James Joyce's Ulysses, all had this fragmentary quality.
A sugary sliminess is the ideal of the slimy. It symbolizes the sugary death of the for itself, like that of the wasp, which sinks into the jam and drowns in it. But at the same time, the slimy is myself, by the very fact that I outline an appropriation of the slimy substance. That sucking of the slimy, which I feel on my hands, outlines a kind of continuity of the slimy substance in myself. These long, soft strings of substance which fall from me to the slimy body, when, for example, I plunge my hand into it and then pull it out again, symbolize a rolling off of myself in the slime. Jean-Paul Sartre.
This was written in Being in Nothingness. It's towards the end of Being in Nothingness. It's about 8 pages, which is a kind of forerunner of the Poetics of Abjection. But it's not often quoted by philosophers because he often equates the female sex with sliminess. So it's chauvinist. But it's an interesting piece of writing. There's lines like he says, slime is the agony of water. So he writes it more like a novelist than a philosopher.
Every word is like an unnecessary stain on silence and nothingness. Samuel Beckett. Giacometti and Jean Genet. Genet, sorry, 1954 to 5.
I mean, Genet is, well, you can read this.
The rims of his eyelids were burning. A blow received straightens a man up and makes the body move forward. To return that blow, or a punch, to jump, to get a hard-on, to dance, to be alive. But a blow received may also cause you to bend over, to shake, to fall down, to die. When we see life, we call it beautiful. When we see death, we call it ugly. But it is more beautiful still to see oneself living at great speed, right up to the moment of death. Detectives, poets, domestic servants, and priests rely on objection. From it, they draw their power. It circulates in their veins. It nourishes them.
That's Jean Genet, Quarrel of Brest, which is about a sailor who goes into the underground world of gay sex in the town of Brest. It was made into a film by Fassbinder. And Fassbinder got Warhol to do a drawing or a set of drawings for the poster of the film. So we've got the original book by Genet, a film by Fassbinder, and the drawings by Warhol. And originally, one of the limited editions of the book, it was drawings as well.
I will write a great poem on death. A man like me sees death everywhere. He lives with it all the time. This will be an unexpected book, printed on big pages, in the centre of which there will be small pages, the commentary on the text, which must be read at the same time as the text. At the end, there will be a lyrical explosion, which will also be called Death. Janet again. At first sight, the image does not resemble a cadaver, but it could be that the strangeness of the cadaver is also the strangeness of the image. Maurice Blanchard. To write is no longer to situate death in the future, the death which is always already past. To write is to accept that one has to die without making death present and without making oneself present to it. This is Mary Douglas. As we know it, dirt is essentially disorder. There is no such thing as absolute dirt. It exists in the eye of the beholder. If we shun dirt, it is not because of craven fear, still less dread of holy terror. Nor do our ideas about disease account for the range of our behaviour in cleaning or avoiding dirt. Dirt offends against order. Eliminating it is not negative movement, but a positive effort to organise the environment. It's from Purity and Danger, an analysis of the concepts of pollution and taboo. In 1980, a few months after completing the manuscript for his seminal study, Le Chambre Claire, Notes sur la photographie, translated into English as Camera Lucida, Reflections on Photography, the French philosopher Roland Barthes stepped off a Parisian street corner and was killed by a passing laundry van. He was 65 at the time, hardly an old man, but any reader of Camera Lucida would have to conclude that untimely is not a word as straightforwardly applied to this fatality as it might have been to that of another author. For disconcertingly, Barthes' last statement on the photographic medium is rife with thoughts about death and mortality, his own and that of those he loved. That's Douglas Nicol. I think that says Powers of Horror, an essay on objection. It is not lack of cleanliness or health that causes objection, but what disturbs identity, system, order. Objection is defined as something lurking in the in-between, ambiguous and shady, awaiting to transgress. The fragility of the law, and so simultaneously beseeching and pulverizing the subject. Objection is marked by a relationship to discourse, or certainly its absence. The corpse, seen without God and outside of science, is the utmost of objection. It is death infecting life. It's Julian.
Kristeva, this is one of the most read books in art schools in the last 20 years.
In Kristeva's Black Sun, melancholy is a living death. Eros has become detached from words, from language, from life. Melancholia is cold, on the side of the death drive. John Lecce? Lech. The Severed Head. Capital Visions by Julia Kristeva. Thought without a body is the prerequisite for thinking of the death of all bodies, solar of terrestrial, and the death of thoughts are inseparable from those bodies. Lyotard.
Gilles Deleuze.
The time which is empty and out of joint, with its rigorous formula and static order, its crushing totality and its irreversible series, is precisely the death instinct. Deleuze.
That's one.
By righting herself, woman will return to the body which has been more than confiscated from her, which has been turned into the uncanny stranger on display, the ailing or dead figure, which so often turns out to be the nasty companion, the cause and location of inhibitions. Censor the body, and you censor breath and speech at the same time. Right yourself, your body must be heard. Only then will the immense resource of the unconscious spring forth. Ainsi so.
One got a kind of thought about this text. This idea of censoring the body as a sort of prerequisite for dead writing. The idea that the body must be heard, that's the place from which writing, true writing, springs up. We'd like to read. I'd read this one. The Jeep would round the bend, be hit by a dozen bullets at once, and that would be the end of his petty history of unfocused groping and unimportant dissatisfactions. Norman Mailer, The Naked and the Dead. This is one of the first novels which was described as being postmodernist. So the idea in relationship to literature came first with postmodernity in the 50s, where you get the kind of mixing of genres in popular literature and high literature. We'd like to speak.
I'll give it a go. The following three images are probably the most reproduced passages in the entire history of cinema. Each of the images is of a penetration of a weapon, a bullet, a razor, and a knife.
You probably know what's coming.
Still image from the film Battleship Potemkin, Sergei Eisenstein, 1925.
This image was used by Francis Bacon for his Pope series.
This passage in the film Un Chien Andalou, 1929, by Buñuel and Dali is probably the most shocking in the history of cinema. The film starts with the title card reading, Once Upon a Time, but then proceeds to dissolve any sense of narrative continuity. No longer subsumed into coherent causality, images appear to shock by virtue of their loss of rational context. Hitchcock, Psycho, 1960. 45 seconds of a murder that transformed cinema. That's the shower scene?
Yeah. How did he get away with it? The censorship. I mean, censorship was very heavy in around 1960.
Because I think everything was suggested and not direct.
So he did it with sound. He got a carcass of an animal and got the sound effects of stabbing. But you imagine you see, but you don't actually see. So he heightens the sound, montage of sound, and lessens the montage of the body. But you imagine you're seeing much more than you're seeing. You imagine you're there. So it transformed censorship.
In Psycho, Norman Bates is driven to the act of murder through the jealousy he thinks his mother experiences when he is sexually aroused by another woman. In playing out his unresolved Oedipal desires, he assumes the role of the mother. This repressed desire opens out the return of the emotion which is the basis of the uncanny. In the film by Kurosawa, Yojimbo, a samurai, a man without proper name, enters into a warring town. The main street is deserted as all the two factions are hidden inside. Suddenly, a dog appears holding a severed hand in his mouth, and as he runs past the samurai, an uncanny sign of what might follow is presented. In this respect, the dog serves to propel the narrative forward through the force of sudden interruption. The dog serves as a messenger of a heightened sense of the reality principle that anticipates the killing yet to come. Robert Bresson, Mouchette, 1967. Bresson said the character offers evidence of misery and cruelty. She is found everywhere: wars, concentration camp, tortures, assassinations.
I mean, it's the most abject film I've ever seen, the most difficult to watch, takes you to the limit of being able to endure. It's just about a single girl whose father is an alcoholic and his mother is dying, and she has to look after the child who takes abuse of the father. And she goes to school exhausted and is bullied. I mean, it goes on the litany of horror. Don't watch it unless you've got strong guts.
In the Realm of the Senses, 1976, by Oshima, we become witness to a journey of sexual encounter to the very limit of dissolution of sexuality unto death. As such, it should be seen as a transition of sexual passion passing over into erotic expenditure.
So she basically strangles him to death.
Andre Breton,
Right. So it's never been shown in Japan.
I watched it in Paris. I think I might have mentioned 1981.
Yeah, you can see it, but it's
Very shocking movie.
without it's shown in a special license. You found it shocking. It was meant to shock.
Yes, we are all uni students from South Korea, imagine. And we are in European tour, and somehow we stumble onto this movie, and it's very shocking to this. Think about a bunch of 20 Asian students. We're all age 21 plus minus, and in South Korean culture, we couldn't see a movie with total naked body to start with, and the whole scene and the story, she strangled two men for the extreme of sexual pleasure, etc.
Mm.
Quite awakening in a way.
I mean, it's inspired by Bataille, the idea of eroticism being sexuality unto death. It's also influenced by Japanese woodblock prints, erotic woodblock prints. It's Blue Velvet.
which is a combination of genres, a horror film combined with film noir, which begins with the discovery of a severed ear that leads a college student into a dark underworld of crime and sexual transgression. Andre Breton proclaimed that beauty should be convulsive or not be, which opened a way of switching the value of the marvelous for the sense of the uncanny. Merritt Oppenheim, Object, Luncheon in Fur, 1936. He's got a lot of mileage out of that piece.
I mean, it's incredible. It's one of the most quoted images in the whole history, well, 20th century.
The uncanny is something that has been repressed and resurfaces again. The use of the found object is a passage from the ordinary to the strange, which signifies an uncanny shift. Man Ray, The Enigma of Isidora Duques, 1920. The work consists of a sewing machine wrapped in a blanket. Beautiful as the accidental encounter of a dissecting table, of a sewing machine, and an umbrella.
Another famous 19th century text by Lautréamont, which inspired the Surrealists.
I should pass on to someone else here.
This is Man Ray, Indestructible Object from 23 and Man Ray, The Gift from 1921. Max Ernst utilized the 19th century graphical illustration materials to create uncanny collages which open out an entirely new domain of possible meaning. What was once familiar is now rendered strange. So often this passage from one century to another brings about the uncanny, a reconfiguration of meaning. This is Dora Maar, Double Portrait with Hat from 1936 to 7, and The Years That Lie in Wait for You, 1935. There's Ellen Lotar. This appeared in one of the documents which published by Georges Bataille. The objection of the inside of the dead cow. Again, Ellen Lotar. In his painting of the effects of aerial bombardment of the town of Guernica in 1937, Picasso captured the entanglement of broken bodies inside and outside of modern history. So as if it's the whole of time. Probably the most abject artifact in the history of the 20th century, Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit from 1939, singing about the lynching of black subjects in the South by the Ku Klux Klan in particular. I believe this song was censored by the BBC. Max Ernst, The Eye of Silence from 43 to 44 at the time of the war. So transmutation of human culture into a post-historical space of mutation. Almost recalls Ovid's Metamorphosis. This is Pierre Bonnard's self-portrait from 45. In his late self-portrait, his eyes become darkened in as if no longer organs transmitting the light, but rather casting inwards. Thus, the darkened eyes become emblematic of the turn away from the external perception of light and towards the internal meditation on the inevitable coming death. Next person.
I can read. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear. You go ahead.
The work of art is not intended for future generations. It is offered to the innumerable people of the dead. Jean Genet, writing on the work of Giacometti. Francis Bacon, Two Figures, 1953. Manzoni Artist Sheet, 1961. Andy Warhol Electric Chair, 1964. Violence doesn't want to hear it. It has no interest in knowing. It is not interested in being anything but its ignorance or deliberate blindness. A stubborn will that removes itself from any set of connections and is connected only with its own shattering intrusion. Jean-Luc Nancy, The Ground of the Image.
So this was a late 60s image from the Vietnam War after the aftermath of napalm bombing. This is Stuart Brisley.
Stuart
This was produced in Gallery House, which is where the Goethe Institute is now. And Brisley located himself in a dirty bath on the upper stairs, which stank of decaying flesh. And people would either put their head round the corner and run away, or stand in fascination. This figure emerged in this black bile. It smelt from the bottom of the stairs towards the end of the exhibition. You could smell it it was on the 4th floor in the bathroom, but you could smell it on the 1st floor. That was one of the most disgusting artifacts which was shown in that period. I say disgusting in quote.
Schneemann read out criticism of her work from a scroll pulled from within her vagina. Carolee Schneemann, Interior Scroll, 1975. Joseph Beuys, Like America and America Likes Me. I Like America and America Likes Me, 1974.
So he was in a gallery which was like a cage, locked in with a coaching dog. He was taken to the gallery by ambulance from the airport and taken back out of America by the ambulance. So he never touched American soil.
In the painting Monument, 1976, by Philip Guston, legs and feet are piled up in what appears to be like a monument. There is little sense of what it is that preceded this event, so there is a feeling of inertia or waiting. In many ways, it undermines the memorialization that official monuments signify. The painting appears instead as a refusal to signify anything at all. Leon Golub Mercenaries 1V 1980.
These are huge paintings on tarpaulins and show death squads in South America. Often mercenaries had been to fight in the Congo or in Vietnam, were used in these death squads, which disappeared people from the streets. It's called the Dirty Wars of Latin America.
Now is the time for dogs. Leon Golub, Sebastian T. Ras. Che Guevara's corpse displayed by the Bolivian military after his capture. An officer is seen poking a finger into his body as if wishing to be certain that he is in fact dead.
That photograph was wide over all the world. It was big news. Che Guevara is dead.
Postmodernity, abjection as a dominant aesthetic form. Kiefer, Eisenstein, Iron Path, 1986.
This was a painting of the Iron Path, the railway towards Auschwitz, the railway of no return.
Ensam Kiefer, Melancholia, 1990 to 1991. Gerhard Richter produced a series of October 18, 1977, 1988, with 15 paintings which suspend the question of historical truth. All the images are blurred, so are lacking in focus.
The paintings are in Museum of Modern Art in New York, not in Germany. It's the death of the members of the Baader-Meinhof. There was a controversy of whether they committed suicide or whether they were assassinated by the state. But Richter refused to sort of paint a definite conclusion. It's as if the images are suspended in this blur, no longer possible to reveal anything.
Cindy Sherman, Untitled 153, 1985. I wanted my photographs to be as powerful as the last thing a person sees or remembers before death. Joe Peter Whitkin. In this self-portrait, the artist Araki presents himself as someone who is on the edge of being a monster by passing through the borderline of the subject into a state of becoming object. The fashion designs of Alexander McQueen drew upon a combination of uncanny, abject, fetish, and erotic sources of inspiration. For Warhol, the oxidation paintings were simply motifs that connected high and low culture, action painting and the world of baths and their golden showers. Rosalind Krauss.
So he was fascinated by Jackson Pollock and the idea of the popular idea of him being Jack the Dripper, but also a sense in which he was also known as Jack the Pisser, both for him getting drunk a lot of the time and also urinating in public when he was drunk, going out on the street and urinating. So there's a play between Jack the Dripper, Jack the Pisser, and these oxidation paintings.
Robert Mapplethorpe, Dominic and Elliot.
They chronicled the underworld of New York, the gay bars and the SM dens. And
Immersions, Peace Christ, Andres Serrano, 1987.
This is one of the most controversial works of art of the whole of the 1980s in New York. He took a kitsch every day crucifix of Jesus Christ on the cross and immersed it in blood and urine and rephotographed it.
This image contains the sacrificial, death, abjection, and violence. It is all those things, but all the excess of each, being both strange and enigmatic. This photograph, 1992, was set in a morgue of a victim who was knifed to death. The artist Andres Serrano produced an entire series of these images reflecting different forms of death. The attention is cool and detached, as if death disappears once the body has been processed and reduced to a medical or police document.
This is Mapplethorpe, a year before he died of AIDS.
Freud developed the concept of Zeitlos, or time outside of time. It is the time of the indestructible drive, indestructible drive, or the time of death. In this self-portrait by Robert Mapplethorpe, a black hole or void is staged beyond the representation or transfer.
Does someone else read that section?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll read. Gregory Cruzen's Untitled, 2001. Death suspends the relation to place, even though the deceased rests heavily in his spot, as if upon the only basis that is left him. To be precise, this basis lacks, the place is missing, the corpse is not in its place. Where is it? It is not here, and yet it is anywhere else. Nowhere. But then nowhere is here. The cadaverous presence establishes a relation between here and nowhere. Maurice Blanchard. The film was set in Fukushima in an empty restaurant. The monkey's face is concealed by a no theatre mask as it waits for customers who never arrive. Pierre Huyghe, Untitled, Human Mask, 2014.
So it was contaminated with, obviously, plutonium. The restaurant was emptied and they filmed this monkey which was taken from a restaurant in Tokyo which served the restaurant, trained to serve clients, but took the monkey which had been trained in Tokyo, took it to this deserted restaurant, and it doesn't know what to do. It half tries to act as if it's serving clients, but is confused by the situation of being alone. But when you first see the film, you're not sure what it is. The mask makes you think it's a human figure, and then you see the monkey's hands. It's dressed up as a waitress. They filmed it with a drone.
The work of Doris Salcedo, Tabla Rasa 6, 2018 to 20, is composed out of a commonplace object of use that becomes transformed into an object for mourning the mourning the disappeared into a different form of object. In this way, it becomes a memory sculpture. Mona Hatoum, Interior Landscape, 2008, bed, pillow, human hair, map, wire hanger. The YBA generation introduced transgressive material into their art forms. They wanted to shock the public and create a new set of discussions about art and life. Ron Muick, Dead Dad, 1996.
This is 2/3 life size. It was in the Sensation show. It was one of the pieces which attracted the most commentary.
His work is so realistic in the sense that hair is sewn into the skin forms. It really gives a strange feeling when you see it up close.
He worked for the film industry, making models.
Right.
Discovered Saatchi sort of put all his early work.
In the work Fucking Hell by the Chapman brothers, there is an arrangement of 9 cabinets that contain tens of thousands miniature figures doing the most depraved things that are imaginable. There is an echo of the world of Bosch, with its depiction of imagery, hell, and damnation scenes, and with this, a sense of threshold of representation.
Sarah Lucas, one of her self-portraits. My Bed by Tracy Emin.
In the work My Bed, 1989 to 2015 by Tracy Emin, it might be understood of as yet another variant of the found object, mixed with personal narrative. Equally, it could be dealing with the aspiration of closing the gap on art and life. So what is it we being presented with? Perhaps a record of passage of life in the form of a simulation, already made in the form of an unmade bed, an installation that evokes a portrait of an artist, a real object with aesthetic modes of elaboration, a gesture closer to the theatre, or an act of abject provocation. Possibly it is all of these things, depending on vantage point, because of the way that it works directly on the process of gaining attention. It is one of the most iconic objects of contemporary art because of the way that this outcome is inscribed into its very fabric and rhetoric in its staging. Ian Curtis was the lead singer of Joy Division, who introduced a bleak, gritty poetics into the pop world with songs such as Love Will Tear Us Apart. He committed suicide but left behind a creative legacy which is still haunting. It is often the cause that melancholics and depressives claim that words have no meaning. Connected to this is the feeling that they are viewing events as it outside of themselves. When these conditions become extreme, it is as if the object starts to experience a living death. Marlene Dumas, Grief, 2008. Akiko Takizawa, Father, 2014. In every photograph, there are spectres. What survives or lives on in a photograph, thanks to the photographic process, is the survival of the dead or of ghosts. Cass Sakai. David Bowie released his album Black Star on his 69th birthday, 2 days before his death of cancer. The lyrics appear to allude to mortality, but the music itself experiments with free-form elements and references.
This is the group Sankai Juko, Japanese dance drama, Buto dancers.
We are broken from birth. We are only corpses standing in the shadow of life. We should be afraid. The reason that we suffer from anxiety is that we are unable to live without our fear. Anxiety is something created by adults. The dancer, through the Buto spirit, confronts the origin of his fears, a dance which crawls through the bowel of the earth. Tatsumi Hikikata. Enrico David, Graduations of Slow Release. Many of the world's population live in an abject poverty. Switch on the TV and the news is saturated with stories of wars, famines, floods, fires, violence, diseases. A multiple screen video work of the interwoven footage that addresses how human activity is affecting the natural habitat across the world.
Us.
In the book A Finite Thinking, Jean-Luc Nancy discovers the relationship between destruction and ways in which we might understand how this force might assume identical relationship to the present culture. Destruction has become a fact of culture or of civilization. It has become not only, as is always the case, an action perpetrated, and not only a grand scale operation, systemic in its object and methods. The genocides, the camps, the Armenian catastrophe, the Jewish Shoah, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Stalinist deportation, the shelling, napalm, defoliation, and oil fires that characterize modern warfare, the gassing of the Kurds, and so on. A litany that's both unbearable and entirely unnecessary, but also of value, or the distorted reflection of a value, the index, even, of a duty, task, or a destiny. Perhaps this history is itself in the process of touching upon its limits. At the very least, though to say that destruction has ended up becoming just such an index, if not the index, of our culture.
Sorry, I missed the end of that. Somehow everything just stopped. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can.
The idea of the index becoming destruction, becoming the index of the culture.
Do you think, Jonathan, that that's one of the reasons why the abject becomes so important when we're in periods of chaos and war like this?
I mean, you could say the last period of late modernity has been an abject period, has been inclined towards abjection. But it's also in turn a theatre as well. I think with the YBA it was a kind of theatre of objection. So it's played out in different ways.
Mm.
So perhaps it's always there as an index throughout history. It's just a matter of it expanding and contracting, different periods, different times.
Or the facet presents itself as like the theater of the abject versus the horror of the abject. Guernica versus Tracy Emin's Bed.
Yeah, it's a matter of scale and intensity. I mean, the bed was definitely a piece of theatre.
Maybe Jericho versus not versus, but do you know, I mean the like as we come forward, maybe Dead Father and Jericho's looking at the sort of decapitated heads, the studies of the heads, sort of a similar intensity and different across, you know.
I think also it's as if registers invade each other. So the object isn't just within what acts in the world, but also within the chaos of registers. So a lot of the time you no longer know what you're looking at. You no longer know what you're listening to. I mean, I think what's the most abject is the disintegration of language. I mean, the disintegration of language makes possible the what's happening in Gaza. Disintegration of language is related to the refugee crisis. I mean, it's disgraceful the language which the present government are using, the boat situation, or of saying sleeping rough, homeless is a lifestyle choice. I mean, it's that disintegration of language makes possible the horror. But a lot of art is anesthetized, doesn't want the too much of that world in its trace element. So it goes for sort of repetition and boredom.
But then you get artists like Ansam Kiefer who would go take it head on and actually explore what those notions are and what that means to a race, to the German people, for example.
I'm very ambivalent about Kiefer.
I always have been too until I started, well, I saw the film with Wim Wenders and I just thought it's interesting, this notion that he's taking the idea of what it is to be German to the German public and sort of wanting to open up those discussions post World War II as to how they see themselves inside that historical time.
And that seems to be very timely considering the sort of rise of this far right party that it was just revealed that they've had 7 secret meetings in Germany to kind of expel a bunch of people, speaking of the refugee crisis. So that now there's counter protests to that setting up again, and so it is this reflection of what do we want to be and who do we want to be. But I think it's interesting, Jonathan, that you showed his early work, because that work hasn't been museumified. Like, you know, you were talking about the museumification of the show that we just saw, where everything, there's less consequence in the work. So it's more collectible.
I mean, we've got wholesale serialization of and work which gestures towards being true to reality. I went to see the exhibition at White Cube of Gormley, Anthony Gormley. I find it so dry and I mean, it's almost without effect, and yet its rhetoric was of effect. Has anyone seen the White Cube?
Yeah, I've seen that show last weekend, and uh, it's my first time to see Antony's like real work in a gallery space. And I know he's super famous in the world, but it was my first time. And I just feel like I don't know, I think I expect more about Antony, but I just feel like the work just show me how many factory and how many assistants he got, because there's a lot of works, a lot of like bricks and a lot of very large, very tall metal works. I just feel like it's lacks of the like the idea, the sparkle idea. I don't know, what do you feel, Jonathan?
I was just, I felt there's a turning point that is just drained of all capacity to be what it's meant to be. Kind of theatre again, and a kind of display of power and sort of overkill. The room with all the Lego like figures is just so much of an overkill.
I haven't seen it from the images though. It looks like it's sort of, he's just taking up real estate. He's just occupying the space.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just
I think it could be the challenge of for the artist. 3, 4 years ago, I went to Royal Academy of Anthony Comley's show with my daughter, and we were quite impressed with all the different rooms. So, in a way, that show, if anybody have seen, what I liked about that was that uh, the artwork really responded to the size and room that was given. Some rooms were like a tunnels of things. Some rooms had his figures, of course, but it was very different and sort of diverse in a way, which I liked. I just want to add, I don't know his recent shows, so cannot really comment, but one of my reference artists, Gerhard Richter, I follow his work decades and decades. He's constantly, I think, revamping. Like 2 years ago, I was in Basel Art Fair, and his all this colorful 3D sculpture form was just something also very interesting. And also, many years ago, went to Cologne Cathedral, so his well-known color-based the stained glass on the windows sort of thing. So personally, I'm trying to sort of constantly moving on to next stage, not sort of staying in something. Some people have their own signature style for all the rest of their life, and some people have every decade in a way something moving on. So again, question to everybody that I like to throw on.
I mean, I've started to look at shows and think I looked at a Jamie Hurst show at Phillips Auction House, and I felt I'm not looking at art anymore. I'm looking at a product. I'm looking at marketing and a kind of very clever production value.
But
Very
don't you,
small.
but don't you think people said the same of Andy Warhol?
I mean, it's probably true about Andy Warhol as well.
Yeah, but that was his persona. That was part of his, those were like choices he made in his practice. Same with Jeff Koons. I will push up my sleeves like Miami Vice and drive a Corvette. It's part of his performative act. It was one of his works was to be himself. And same with Warhol, I think. But I think what you're talking about now, Jonathan, leans more toward the side of like Marina Abramovich just came out with a skin cream. Really pricey thing to make everybody look as damp as she always looks.
Mm.
And so that's, she dropped a book and then all of these wonderful things and like dropped Prince. And like the day after she dropped Prince, she joined hands with Gwyneth Paltrow and put out a skin cream.
There's hope for us yet.
They're becoming corporations.
I feel for
Again, it's
Anthony
Rola
Borges.
Sorry, just
Sorry,
one
sir.
quick funny story. Royal Academy a couple of years ago, my daughter and I bought, I think it was Pisco? No, one of the liqueur at the Royal Academy, the Gomli trademark, the Lego Man thing. And I just finished the bottle the other day with a group of friends. Oh, Tioxape, it was the liqueur.
And any last questions? I'm aware of time and Abigail's got to present. So if Abigail could